On today's episode of Drummers Eating Pizza, John and Liam travel to meet with John DeChristopher at his home studio. John talks about his early drumming memories and his start in the retail industry in Boston. John will talk about some amazing moments with his drum heroes and about his podcast, Live from My Drum Room, and his current band, Grand Theft Audio. Please remember to like, share, and subscribe to Drummers Eating Pizza and John's Live from My Drum Room. And now, Drummers Eating Pizza.
All right, everybody, welcome to Drummers Eating Pizza episode. I think this is 8 or 9. I'm not quite up to 450 or wherever you are at with your podcast.
200 something.
200, yeah. So we've got the legend in the music industry. He's definitely too humble to admit that. But John DeChristopher, thank you for being here, welcoming us into your studio.
Thank you.
I appreciate you making the time for this. So we're going to do this kind of backwards because usually we eat pizza first and then we do the interview. So we're going to interview and then eat pizza.
Well, I'm left-handed, so I'm used to doing things backwards.
You know what? That's a good point. All right, so question-wise, we're going to go through as many as we can because I've got a million questions for you.
You got
it. First musical memory.
Oh, man. That's a great question. And I'd have to say, you know, I think a lot of people my age might say the Beatles. And that's certainly an early memory for me. I mean, I was born in 1960. And the Ed Sullivan Show, I was 3 years old. I'd only just turned 3 in December of '63. But I remember my older sister and brother playing the Beatles around the house. But really, I think what really resonated, I used to be sort of ashamed to say this when I was younger, but it was the Monkees in 1966 when I was 5, 6 years old, and that show was on TV. And every week you could tune in and see these guys playing instruments, and that definitely is a memory. So if it's not that, it might be just before that. I have all these memories of like the Rubber Soul record, which I at the time maybe I didn't know. I remember the cover of it, and but the songs on that record, I remember in the 65 maybe it came out, 65 or 6, and listening to that. My sister had the album, so definitely the Beatles, and probably later the Stones. And the Monkees TV show.
Yeah, I do remember the reruns of the Monkees.
Yeah.
I'm a little bit younger.
A little bit younger. I think so, yeah.
All right, so first, did you start on drums or did you play clarinet in school band and then switch over to drums?
Started on drums. I think I had an interest as far as I can, far back as I can remember. Just from seeing, as I said, the Monkees and just seeing the Ed Sullivan Show and bands and going somewhere and seeing a drummer. But by the time I was about 11, I really thought like, okay, I want to learn to play the drums. So I actually went out and bought a pair of drumsticks at my local music store, and I hadn't had any lessons. And I used to just, air drum along to records. And I'm not unique. I mean, everybody I think has the same story. And so this would have been around 1972. And I just really got more and more interested and serious. And then my next door neighbor, who's still my best friend, Mike Mahoney, gave me an old snare drum that he had from when he took lessons when he was much younger. It was like in his basement up on a shelf, and he said, you should have this. And I would just sit there and just play on the snare drum. And that 1972, that year that I turned 12, and for Christmas my dad bought me a drum set, and that was my first drum set. But I'm self-taught. I took lessons years later for a little while to get the basics to reading, but I'm sadly self-taught, and it shows.
Now, do you still have that drum set?
I don't, but I did a few years ago. I sold that drum set. My dad bought me a beautiful set of Gretsch drums in 1974, and I was in a band that had a friend of mine playing percussion who was also a very good drummer, and he needed a drum set, so I pretty much gifted him the drum set, I think a few bucks, and I didn't think I'd ever need them or want to see them again. They were from the Sears catalog, and and I felt like I'd outgrown those drums. And but I will say this, John. So about 4 years ago, I tracked down almost an exact replica of that set, and I have them in the other room. I bought them, so it's not the exact set that my dad got me, but it's as
close as you could get.
As close as you can get. Same vintage Sears, and it turns out they're made by Star, which is Tama drums, but they were making all those Japanese drum sets back then. So
yeah. My first kit was a Noble and Cooley kids kit. But I think it was the same thing. I think it was out of the Sears catalog.
Yeah.
I remember getting it for my birthday. It was birthday or Christmas, and my cousins came over, and they were a couple years older than me. And it was, the heads were probably super thin plastic or maybe even just paper. And within like 10 minutes, the whole kit was blown up, and that was pretty much the end of that drum set.
Yeah.
And then I did violin in 3rd grade.
Wow.
And I just remember the teacher saying, "Oh, Mrs. Longstreet, I think her name was, is coming in, and she's going to do violin. She's going to show you these violins. You can take music classes." And immediately I was like, I want to do that. I didn't want to play violin, but I knew I want to make music.
Yeah.
And then I did saxophone in 4th grade because my friend down the street played saxophone, and he learned to play like The Heat Is On. And I was like, that's awesome. I need to learn how to play that. And then I remember 5th grade, the first day of band. And I didn't know it was band. They must have made an announcement. I think I was sick the day before. They said, everybody tomorrow at 11 a.m. report to the auditorium for band. So I think it was fifth grade band or 5th and 6th grade band. And we sat right in front of the drummers, and they were all warming up. Yeah. And the band instructor, because, John Adams, it says, you're a saxophone player, but I don't see you have your instrument. I was like, yeah, I didn't know that we had band today, but I'm a drummer now. And he's like, what do you mean you're a drummer? He goes, we have 11 drummers. I go, I know. Yeah. But I said, I'm going to be a drummer. He's like, well, your parents have to sign this sheet, and you're going to have to take lessons. I go, listen, I'll sign the sheet. I'll be back tomorrow with the sheet. And that was what I did. I went home.
That's awesome.
And my parents said, we're not buying you a drum set for at least a year, because this is the 3rd year on the 3rd instrument. So I got my Remo practice pad and 2 B drumsticks, because that's what they wanted, and whatever the elementary book 1.
And how old is this son?
This was 11.
11, okay.
Because that would have been...
good age for it, yeah.
Yes.
That's when it sticks.
Yes, and then at 12, I got my first drum set.
Yeah.
Which was a Remo, the pre-tuned ones.
Oh, yeah.
So they just had the clips on them.
Yeah.
But it was great, because I didn't have to worry about it until they started rattling, and then my dad would get me a new head, or you could buy the new clips.
Right. Oh, that's great.
Yeah. But it's funny, because you'll find some people that start on other instruments, and then somehow they gravitate towards the drums.
Right.
Or you get people that are like, oh, no, that's from day one. That's what I knew I wanted to do. So how about a light bulb moment of, this is what I want to do? Because I think when we're all younger, I'm sure you didn't say, oh, I want to work in a music store.
No.
And eventually end up working for a Zildjian cymbal company. We all think we're going to be on that big stage like Ringo and everyone else. Did you have a light bulb moment of seeing a band or a drummer where you're like, yes, I want to do this?
Yeah, I probably did. I will say that I started playing when I was 11, say, and really seriously 12th birthday, which was a week before Christmas. I got my drum set. And then a year later, I was in a band with some guys about my age, a little bit younger. And we played our first gig in June of 1974 I was in the 8th grade at the time, but we played at my old elementary school where I, grades 1 through 6. And we did 2 concerts for the school. And if there was ever a light bulb moment, it was probably that was playing in front of, like a full auditorium of grades 1 through 3, and then 4 through 6 was the second show. And it was, you can imagine what it was like. These kids were screaming, and it was just incredible. And I thought, this is what I want to do. And I was old enough at that point, 13, almost 14, to where, like, I appreciated what it was. Like that if I keep doing this, and maybe with this band or another band, I really want to, I knew that I had to keep practicing and become an even better drummer. And not that I was any good then, but I thought I was. But yeah, so I started to really take it seriously, and I joined another band a year later, which is coming up on 50 years, like this year.
Are you guys doing a reunion?
I think so. We're talking about it, yeah. A couple of the guys live out of state, and a couple of the guys are local still. And I played in this band from 1975 to 1983 with a few personnel changes, but myself and the bass player were the constant throughout, the core throughout. And but I joined that band, and they were much better than my other band, and it was a real professional, like we had a PA system, we had a bass player, which we didn't have in my other band. We were called Trigger. And we played all the high school dances in the area. We played in my hometown, Melrose. We played in Stoneham, where the other guys were from, and all over the North Shore. And we were popular. And it was like, yeah, this is what I want to do, you know. But so to go back to your original question, the light bulb moment was probably I had seen I'd been to concerts. I remember going and seeing Aerosmith in 1975 at the old Boston Garden in April, and then 2 months later I saw the Rolling Stones for the first time. Charlie was my biggest influence, my hero and my friend, and that was less of a light bulb and more of a like, I can't believe I'm actually here right now. Like, you know, I was sitting there with my friends going like, he's right there.
Where was this? Where was the concert?
At the Boston Garden, at the old Garden. Yep. And you know, we were sitting up above, and I'm looking down, and I'm just like watching him play his Black Gretsch set, and I'm going like, this is. And I told him the story years later, and he got such a kick out of it. And he's like, I said, you know, the first time we met, you probably don't remember, was at the Boston Garden in 1975. And he looked at me like, I said, yeah, I was like 14. I was up in the second balcony.
I waved to you.
Yeah, he's going, oh, you know. You know, he felt almost for a second, he's like, what, we met then? Like, what? But anyway, so there were definitely some light bulb moments along the way, but I think feeling that exhilaration that you feel when you're on a gig and people are digging it and you're digging it, there's nothing like it.
No, there's not. You're trying to explain it to, you can explain it to an athlete that's in the big game and they take that final shot and they make it, and it's like, wow, this is, you know, when you talk about like somebody in the Super Bowl, you know, Tom Brady throwing that pass, and he's like, I've dreamt of this moment for years, you know, 1,000 times in my backyard throwing to my dad or whoever. Like, I've dreamt of this moment. They can kind of get it, but I think the average person that doesn't, maybe the birth of a kid where it's like, oh, life changing, where it's like, okay, things are now different. But yeah, there's no adrenaline rush or feeling of people clapping and coming up and saying that was awesome. Yeah. My light bulb moment, and it's funny, it's related to Charlie, was the Blushing Brides. They went to Riverside in Agawam, which is now Six Flags. Yeah. And I was probably either 8th grade or freshman in high school. And I'd never really seen a concert, like maybe some of the school stuff, if they brought artists in to do a jazz thing or something. But we were on the outside of the racetrack, and they're right in the middle, and they started with Jumpin' Jack Flash. And I just remember the drums coming in, and I looked at my buddy who lived down the street that played guitar, and I go, that's what I want to do. I go, that's it. You know, I did sports, and I think we all dream, if you play sports, I'm going to play second base for the Red Sox, I'm going to play point guard for the Celtics. But in your head, you're like, that's probably not going to happen. But I remember thinking, like, I can do that. And I just remember, you know, the big speakers, and that was the first time I'd ever seen a big concert. Yeah. So it's funny how, like, I guess Charlie kind of did, you know, the Rolling Stones did become my light bulb moment of, like, this is what I want to do. Yeah. And then doing sports in high school, I got cut from the basketball team. I did lacrosse freshman year, and I played about a month, and I was like, this is too much running. Yeah. This is not what I want to do. Like, I can play drums in my house and then go and play, and people are going to clap for me. I'm like, I suck at lacrosse. I got cut from basketball. So I think I'm going to go the music route. Yeah. And then that's when I, like, narrowed in and said, okay, I've got to get serious about taking lessons. We had a couple guys from Westfield State that would come in because they were a big teaching school, so the music education was big there. So they would all come in and do their student teaching in the local school. So we had a jazz drummer that came in, and he was the first one that kind of opened my eyes to, like, giving me jazz exercises. I think it was like the Jim Chapin book. Oh, wow. And that was the first thing of, like, trying to sit down there and play the ride cymbal and get my snare drum to line up or not line up. And then he wanted me to put hi-hat in 2 and 4. Like, what is this guy, crazy? But that was kind of the beginning for me where I was like, okay, I want to do this. Like, I want to do music.
That's great.
So how did you get into, what was the beginnings of the music industry?
That was, I won't say it was by accident, but it was definitely fortuitous, I guess, if nothing else. But I'll fast forward along. In 1979, I was going to go to Berkeley, took a gap year after graduating high school. I was going to go to Berkeley. And I ended up getting a job at this music store in Boston called E224. And it was like the happening place at the time. This was 1979. This was way, way back when. And I used to shop there, and it was just such a cool happening. The vibe was great. I ended up staying there, and over time, and a year and a half later, getting promoted to drum department manager. And during that, I sort of decided to forego going to Berkeley, and I thought, well, I could always do that later or go to college later, but I'm going to keep pursuing this. My band was still playing a lot, and I was kind of just making a living playing in a band and working at this cool music store. And then I got bitten by the bug of, like, maybe LA is where I need to be to really sort of up my game. Boston's great, but it's a much smaller music scene than Los Angeles, especially in 1985. So moved out to LA, but in between that time, I had made friends with the person that was running Simmons Drums in the USA, and this was in 1982. A man named Glyn Thomas had come to Wurlitzer to do a clinic to demonstrate these new SDS-5 electronic drums that were the rage. You could hear them on Duran Duran records, and they were really starting to happen. They'd been in England, like on records and things before that, but they were starting to happen in the States. So Glyn came in and we bought this SDS-5. And part of the deal was he would come in and demonstrate it. So that night he came in, and the audience was David Robinson of the Cars and some other, it was a small little group of people, but serious people were interested in these drums. So Glyn did the clinic, did the presentation. He and I went out afterward and hung out, had a great time. The next day, David came in with his drum tech and bought the kit, like right off the floor. We had it probably 24 hours,
Gone.
And I remember sitting there trying to show him what I remembered from the night before, and we were just kind of pushing buttons and trying to figure stuff out. So anyway, long story short is we started selling these drums. They were becoming more popular. We were the first shop in town, first store in town to do it. And Glyn remembered that. So I stayed in contact with him. I actually bought a set myself around 1984. And then in 85, I said, I'm thinking of moving to LA and, trying to pursue music. And would you, I'm not foolish enough to think I'm going to land on my feet and, become Vinnie Colaiuta when I get there. And Glyn said, if you come out here, I'll have a job for you. You're a good guy, and we're growing, and we need good people, and I'll have something. So I hung up the phone thinking, wow, and then I remember just before I finally decided to do it, I called him again, and he said, yep, mate, you come out here, and I'll not take care of you, but I'll have something for you. So I did. I moved out there, and Glyn, the day after I got there, he said, come on in, and it's not an interview, but just want you to meet some people, and I did, and then he wanted me to start like a couple of days later. So I started working there in the summer of 1985, and
was it like a brick and mortar?
It was the distribution center for the USA. Yeah. So all the stuff that came from England came to Calabasas, California.
Yep.
Most famously, Calabasas now was where they had some of those really terrible fires. But it's a beautiful, beautiful area just north of LA, northwest near Malibu, and so I lived not far away in Canoga Park, California, and so we had, and it was an artist center for drummers to come in, and like in my first couple of weeks, I met all these drummers that are my friends still today, like Vinny and Danny Serafin and John Robinson, and I mean just Greg Bissonette, Myron Grombacher. All these drummers were coming in to either get their drums serviced or to pick up something, and because everybody was using these drums at that time, Simmons Drums, and that job unfortunately, after about a year or so, by 1986, Simmons had really had some serious competition from Roland and Yamaha, and they sadly weren't really able to sort of be the brand, the innovator anymore, I should say, in terms of mostly the pad design. The other companies had sort of evolved into a more comfortable playing pad, and that was more desirable. And their sounds were, the Yamaha and Roland sounds were good. And so long story short is I moved on from Simmons. I got a call from Don Lombardi from Drum Workshop in 1986, and he got my number from someone and said, we're looking to introduce DW drums and really be, really serious about making drums. At that time, DW was known as a pedal company, as you probably know, and hardware. And they'd been making some drums, but really Don wanted to be poised as like the next American drum company.
Yeah.
And you might be too young to remember this, John, but at that time, in the mid-'80s, you really had Yamaha and Tama and Pearl drums really dominating the scene. It was, Gretsch was just barely hanging on, Ludwig was just barely hanging on, Rogers was gone, Slingerland was gone, all those American companies were gone. So Don felt this was an opportunity, and turns out he was right. So I went to work for Don in the fall of '86, and we had the official launch of DW drums in January '87 at the NAMM show. And that was a great opportunity, and I consider that to be, I learned so much from both Glyn Thomas at Simmons and from Don Lombardi, and two mentors that are still great friends to this day. And my son was born in the spring of 1987 out in Los Angeles, and after a couple of years out there with him just as a baby, we just felt like we needed to move back east. So I did that at the end of 1988, early 1989, and I'm really giving you the fast forward version because this is a long and somewhat boring story, but the NAMM show of 1989, January of '89, I was back in LA for that show, and the people at Zildjian contacted me or approached me there to come in for an interview for a position they had. And so I went through a couple of the interview process, a couple of interviews, and in the spring of 1989, I took the job at Zildjian. So
now, what was that job going in? Was it what it evolved to be, or was it just?
Yeah, it was. It was that job, but it evolved to a greater capacity. Yeah. So I was hired initially I started in May of 1989, and my job was Artist Relations Manager East Coast and Promotions Manager. And we had a West Coast, they still have a West Coast office, and my counterpart, Mike Morris, was on the West Coast, and Mike was an old friend who I knew from living out there. He had worked at Guitar Center in Hollywood, and I used to go in there when I worked for Simmons, and I'd do demos, and then one day he called and said, hey, I'm the West Coast Zildjian guy now. If you need anything, let me know. And I said, oh, good for you, man. That's great. They got a good guy, And then, I don't know, it was a few years later, I'm on the East Coast, basically doing the same job. And so I started at that position, and then shortly after I was hired, Zildjian had just bought a drumstick factory in Alabama, where we were making our own sticks. And I was given the responsibility of product management and also artist relations for marketing and everything for drumsticks. So that all of a sudden became a bigger job for me. And then within a couple of years, I was promoted to director of artist relations, where the whole, everybody was reporting into me. We had an office in London and the West Coast office, and that became a bigger job. At the same time, shortly after, we hired a separate person to do drumsticks because it was just too much. The drumsticks were growing. But during the time I was involved with drumsticks, I designed several unique, good models that sold well, and that was a nice thing to do, to be able to sort of help the business grow and sign some artists. So long ago now to think about this, but and then eventually I was promoted to vice president of artist relations. Early 2000s.
Now, which stick models did you kind of come up with, or say, let's try this?
So I don't know if I think there's still a few of these still around, but I know the first 3 models that I absolutely came up with the design for were the 6A, which was a sort of the Dennis Chambers stick was based from the 6A. So, and it was thinner than a 5A, had a round bead. It was the first Zildjian stick that had a round bead. The Z4A, which was a acorn-shaped bead, it was about a 5A diameter, but it had a very sort of elongated neck to where it almost felt a little bit top-heavy. And there were some artists that wanted a stick that had a little bit more throw to it. So that was designed, and many artists gravitated to it right away. Like I'd talk to somebody on the phone who'd say, I wish if you guys made a stick that felt like this. And even if it wasn't exactly, it was enough feel-wise for them to go, okay, I could make this work, you know. The Super 5A, the Super 5B were longer and more kind of robust versions of the 5A and the 5B. And then a lot of the artist sticks. The Tony Williams signature stick was the first one that we did with an artist, and I worked with Tony in designing that based on a Gretsch 2B stick that he was using. And basically I met with Tony at the Modern Drummer Festival in 1990, and he handed me a pair of his sticks and he said, if you can make these, I'll play them. And we did, and he became our first signature stick artist. And then from there, it really kind of got the attention of people like Vinny and Dennis and, you know, some artists that then came on board to play the sticks.
Yeah, I still have a couple pairs of the Vinny Calutas.
Yeah, me too.
I definitely use the Dennis Chambers.
Yeah.
I did try when Vinny went to Vader. I tried those, and I don't know that I liked them as much as the Zildjian ones.
Wow, that's good. Yeah.
I feel like they were a little bit longer. I always felt like the Vinnies were slightly shorter than, and maybe because being like short, I always felt sometimes that I needed to reach a little bit more.
Yep.
But I still, like, during lessons, I've got 2 kits, and I'll like, depending on which student comes in, they've got one kit or the other. Most of them like to go over to the Noble and Cooley kit because it's mic'd up and it looks cooler.
Why not?
Yeah. So I've got a bucket of sticks on the other one, and I'm always like, I can see the Vinny Caluta signature. I'm like, oh, I can match. These are good.
Yeah. I think his stick the Zildjian version might have been 15 and 7/8 or 15. I could be just, the standard length is 16 inches, and I think his could be just a hair
feel it just, it was,
shorter.
just a little bit shorter.
For his design, you know, Vinny and Colin Schofield and I traveled to the factory, I remember in 1992, to work on that stick, right there with the stick, you know, factory folks, to just tweak modify the prototypes and everything. So, but yeah.
I'm pretty sure Vinny could use whatever.
He could.
You could give him chopsticks. He
Yeah.
would still blow the rest of us away.
That's right.
He still amazes me when I watch stuff. And it's funny talking about when you went out to LA, watching an interview that he did talking about he was living in his car with his drums.
Yeah.
You know, before the Frank Zappa stuff. So if you're a young drummer and you really want to make it, you might have to live in your car with your drums,
right.
But keep going.
But being Vinny gives you a serious advantage in that situation, though.
Yeah.
I mean, I was not Vinny Caluta.
Yeah.
And I'll just say just a funny thing that since you mentioned that, John, I did go out there, and I did answer a couple of ads that were where people were looking for drummers, and it was just kind of a funny thing. They had the Recycler magazine and LA Weekly, I think, were where you'd find bands looking for musicians. And again, now this is 1985. It's glam rock city, you know. And the ads would read like, such and such band seeking drummer, must be over 6 feet tall, blonde hair, and played double kicks.
Yeah.
And I had a double pedal at the time. I thought, well, I 1 out of 3, I can bluff it on a double pedal, but I sure ain't 6 feet tall, and I'm sure not blonde. But image was so key, and I realized, and I remember Glyn Thomas sort of sitting me down at one point and saying, with this English accent, you're a good guy and you're a hard worker and you could do well in this business. I know you want to play the drums, but it's kind of just saying like there's a lot of BS out there.
Yeah.
And if you're gonna spend your nights driving into Hollywood, you're gonna figure out pretty quickly that. And he was right, and I just sort of put my head down, and Glyn moved me into a sales job after that. When I started there, I was doing like a bunch of different things. I was working in artist relations and sort of tech support and booking clinics with drummers, and he said, I can, you'll make more money doing this in the sales job, and this is really what you should be doing. And I credit him for really sort of like, I was 24, 25 years old, and he just sort of focused me on, and I'm glad I did.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So this actually leads right into my next question.
Oh, good.
I think a lot of drummers, we hit that point where whether it's you've got to start paying the mortgage, the kids are born.
Yeah.
Did you struggle with that? I want to be a player. I want to be on that stage, but there's this job that can, pay me, and I'm still in the music industry doing this. Did you ever have that push-pull moment of like, I don't know, maybe I can still do this. If I really work hard, I can be the player and go on tour and be the rock star? Or was it a quicker, yes, this is what I want to do.
It was
this is
probably,
okay.
Yeah, I think it was quicker from the standpoint of realizing pretty quickly when I got out there what the scene was like, just sort of getting the lay of the land. I didn't want to give up on playing, but I realized that there were lots more opportunities on this, and I had been working retail, so I wasn't not accustomed to having a day job. You know what I mean? I wasn't like a guy that had come off the road, never
wake
had
up at 1 every day.
Yeah, right. And like, now I got to go to an office every day. I was okay with all that, and I think the fact that I made a lot of friends at Simmons that are still friends today, and I think about it 40 years ago that we're still in contact, and that helped, like just knowing that like I had a fun place to go to work every day. But like I said, I didn't want to completely give up on it, but I saw less and less opportunity for that. And then when my son was born in '87, it was pretty easy for me to just kind of go like, this is I didn't.
Your priorities changed pretty quick.
Yeah, it really did.
Yeah, it's hard when, like I was saying earlier, when my daughter was born, the opportunity to take on the full-time job. Yeah, it was kind of like I was really burned out with traveling, and I was like, I need a break anyway. And then it was like, okay, because I had a friend whose dad was a truck driver. And he was always gone.
That's tough.
So it was like, I didn't want to do that when I had kids. I was like, I don't want to be that father that's not there. Yeah. Because I'm sure, like Charlie and Steve Gadd and all these other drummers and that have kids, you might look back and say, I wish I was at more soccer games. I wish I was here. I wish I was there. But, there's also the mentality of this is my job. This is what I do. And I'm all in. Like talking to somebody about like Sean Pelton and Vinny, like those guys are all in. This is what they were going to do no matter what. There was no, a lot of guys say there was no plan B. Like I'm going to be a drummer and that's it. So I got to figure this thing out. Yeah. Well, I'll just say you make a good point because I took the job with Zildjian in '89 and my daughter was born in September of '89. So when I started that job, we were expecting her in 4 months. And that job, it took me everywhere, and I traveled a lot. And so you make an excellent point because I swear, even at this point, I've been out of the business now for 12 years. I still, when I go to my grandkids' soccer games and basketball games, I get a little sad because I missed a lot of my own kids. And I really, and both my kids are like, they're now, 37, 35, and they sort of go, Dad, go, give it a rest. Yeah. You were there. Don't worry about it. But we're gonna sell all your drums when you go and get them. Exactly. We're gonna go on vacation anyway. Yeah. I say to Johnny, to my son, Johnny, I just picked up another I picked up a Craviotto set. Your collection's growing. And he'll say, Dad, don't talk like that. But no. But I was just gonna say that it is. I don't know if it's a regret. I mean, it's like you said. It's part of the job. In my case. In order for me to do the best job that I could at the time and what that job entailed, it involved me going on the road sometimes for 2-3 weeks on a clinic tour or going to
Frankfurt for a trade show for 10 days, or the NAMM show, or anywhere, and just out to the West Coast office every couple of months. I'd be out there for a few days. So I was always going somewhere, and that was the job. But as I reflect on it, I think like I do wish I could have been home for more things, but I can't change that. So
you're going to be there for the grandkids.
Absolutely.
Yes, absolutely.
Yep, absolutely.
So I guess this is a good question with when you got into, maybe this is, in the industry, especially I guess working in the Boston, that was the first one, right?
Yeah, at Wurlitzer, yeah.
Did you find, and I'm sure you've got a million stories, but I always ask people during the interview, is there like, what surreal moments where like maybe you were in there and somebody came in and they're like, hey, John, this person wants to talk to you, and you're like, that's Joey Kramer.
Yeah.
Or, somebody from the Boston area, or somebody on tour walking, and like, what were the first kind of like pinch me moments of like, holy cow, that's so-and-so that just walked in, needs drum heads?
Yeah, that's a great question, because at that time, all the pros from the area, from Boston, would come in there. And the Cars, I mentioned David Robinson, had a studio right across the street called Synchro Sound that they had bought and taken over and refurbished, or whatever, they renovated and recorded a lot of their stuff there. So they were in there all the time. David probably the least amount, but like Elliot Easton, fabulous guitar player. I love him. He would be in all the time, and friendly, approachable guy, really nice guy. And David came in a few times, and I was a big fan of the Cars. And he was, a little more probably reserved, and I'd try not to fawn all over him, but no, it was a fun time, because I met Joey Kramer for the first time when he came in there one day with his tech, who I knew better because he would be in more often. And he brought Joey in, and he said, Joey, this is John. He's the guy that runs the drum department. How you doing, man? He said, I wanted to check out some of those electronic drums. So we had the Simmons weren't available yet, but the Simmons Drums and the Sinnairs, and I gave him a demo, and this would have been probably about like 1980, and he sort of just laughed and said, why would I want these, or something, walked away. He has no recollection of it. I've told him this story, and he's like, really? I said, yeah, you did. You came in and you must have been recording down the street or something, and maybe you thought you needed these for the record. I don't know. You came in, and I had them set up, and I played them, and they just went do 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 do. And you're like, yeah, why would you want these on an Aerosmith record, right? But
Steve and Joey will hate these.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. Yeah. No, and I like all those bands from that time would come in from time to time. Like I met Sib, the late great Sib Hashian from Boston, the first time, and I remember him being like this really super humble guy. Like nobody even knew who he was when he came in, and he was surprised that I knew who he was. And again, I think it was after, it would have been the early '80s, and maybe they were sort of past their initial prime, so to speak. But it was an exciting time, because it was really the sort of, even though we had Jack's Drum Shop around the corner, which was a great drum, dedicated drum shop, we could hold our own, because we had all those major drum brands, and we were competitive, and it was fun.
I grew up on the first Boston album. My father always played it. He went to embalming school, owning the funeral home, in this is his story. I don't know how true it is, but it would have been, my sister was born in 65. And
big birthday this year.
Yeah. Yes, that's right. So this was probably 67. I know my sister was born. I think my brother was on the way, and he was going to school. And I remember being a kid listening. He goes, I saw this band in a bar in Boston, and there was like 10 people in the bar. And he goes, a year later, this album came out, and he goes, that's that band that I saw, because he laughed at his friend who took him. We're going to go out drinking. We're going to go to this bar. He's like, well, what's the name of the band? Boston. He goes, yeah, whatever. What's the name of the band? He goes, the name of the band is Boston. So he was just and then it came out, and so I remember growing up listening to that album. It was that album.
So huge.
That was like the only rock album that he played for the most part, and everything was like 60s doo-wop and Sha Na Na and everything else. We used to have it, I think it was out of Hartford, it was Big D103, it was the oldie station.
Yeah.
Every time I got in the car, that was on. I'm like, oh man. But that's what I grew up playing drums to. Because when he got me the drum set, he goes, I don't know anything about music, but I know the bass player and the drummer are supposed to like work together. So he went over to his receiver and turned the bass way up and turned the treble down. So I remember he threw on, he had like a 25 CD box set of probably like 1960 through 70 or whatever. It was all the hits. So he threw it on. I remember the first song that I can remember is, I don't know who did the cover, but it's It Ain't Me, Babe.
Oh yeah.
And it wasn't Bob Dylan, but it was whoever covered it.
I know, yeah. Who did that? I can hear it in my head. Yeah, it's not Bob. It's probably more popular by the band that covered it.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
But that was the first song
Maybe
I remember.
Birds. I wonder if it's the Birds.
It had a female singer.
It did.
I'll have to look it up.
Okay.
But I remember like, sitting there and hitting like the cymbal, trying to hit it on 2 and 4, and then trying to play the drum part to it. So yeah, Boston was a huge influence on me growing up.
Yeah.
And I remember coming up we were on tour in Miami, and we were coming, I think, into like Baltimore. We were on 95, and the sun was just coming up, and everyone was sleeping. It was like 5 a.m. And I cranked, and it, and within like a minute, you see the eyes kind of opening in the van, and everyone's just like, it's almost like the Wayne's World where, the drums kick in, and everyone's awake from that. And we stopped and got breakfast, but that was my Boston story.
Oh, that's great.
I never got to meet any of those guys, but that was my youth of listening to music, was listening to that first Boston.
That was groundbreaking. Another quick, you made me think of this too, Wurlitzer story, and we talked about Vic Firth earlier, but I first met Vic when I was working there, and I tell this story all the time, and I've told it many times, but he would come so we would order at that time he only made one type of drumsticks, which were the maple American custom models. Mm-hmm. And they were like mallets, and they were like snare drum, like the SD1 General, and a small sampling of sticks, mallets, and some other things. And he would come in, I'd call the house, and it's just so funny to think about this, because I would call the house and leave the order on the answering machine, or Vic would call me back, or my mother-in-law, Olga, would take the order. And he would then bring the sticks in on a Friday to deliver them before a Symphony Hall concert. Of course, he was legendary symphony orchestra timpanist. And he'd come in his tux and with a box of sticks, and he would say, COD, $87 or something. And I'd say, okay, let me go get a check for you. And then my boss would say to me, just tell him to leave him and we'll send him a check. And I'd go back to Vic, and he'd go, no. I know how you guys pay. I want my check right now. And I'd have to go back and forth and say, I've pre-sold 3 of these pairs of mallets, I need that, we've got to give him a check. All right, we'll give him a check. And he would leave with it. But it was just a funny thing. Sometimes he would just double park out front, and I think he drove a Jaguar or something at the time, and with the lights flashing, and he was just so cool back then. And that was obviously our relationship evolved over time, but it was cool to sort of meet him. And then I will say this, I vividly remember it being 1981. He came in one time with a pair of American Classic, his new line of hickory sticks. He said, I just started making. He said, you play rock and roll, right? I said, yes. He said, try these and tell me what you think. And they were American Classic 5A, which I use today. And they were unbelievable. I've been using Regal tip sticks up till that time. And these were the best feeling, best balanced, matched perfectly, just in a bag. He gave them to me. And they've lasted a long time. And I said, I want to get these for the store. We want to order these. And at the time, they made them in 5A, 5B, 2B, and maybe rock, but maybe not. Maybe just 2 or 3 models, and the Steve Gadd black drumsticks. And I just remember once we started carrying them, we could not keep them in stock. And I'd every week be calling for like 12 or 24 pair. And that was the beginning of that whole American, like him getting into the mainstream stick business was at that point. And in my opinion, he never really looked back. I think he a few years after that, he was #1 still is. So
Yeah.
they still are Big Firth. Yeah.
I remember in high school, if we would go to a gig and you would use a backline kit, and it was somebody else's drum set, you would know what sticks they use. You'd be like, I gotta use Weckles. Because you'd have the the red on there, or he's using Gad sticks because there's black marks on the the center of the drum. And then I think with the jazz guys, the Buddy Rich sticks had like the white finish, so you'd see the white paint on the cymbals. You're like, that's a Buddy Rich stick guy. So it's funny that you said the black Steve Gadd, because I remember getting those and hitting the drums.
That's right. Yeah.
And then I remember being like, wow, I need to aim better, because like the floor tom wouldn't be in the center.
You couldn't avoid it though. Yeah, you couldn't avoid it. Yeah.
Any other surreal moment? Again, I'm sure you've got a million of them.
Surreal moments, like
maybe like a Charlie. Since Charlie Watts is the guy. What was it? The first time you met Charlie, or was there something where you were like pinching yourself, being like, "I'm here with Charlie Watts doing this"?
The first surreal moment with Charlie was, again, I'll try to condense the story, but I remember this would have been in early 1997. I had a couple of close calls. In '89, when Living Colour was opening for the Stones, I had just started at Zildjian. Will Calhoun and I had become very good friends, still a good friend today, and invited me to the show in Foxborough, at the stadium there. And he said, I told Charlie, he had become friendly with Charlie on the tour, and he said, I told Charlie you were coming and he'd like to meet you. I said, oh, that'd be great. Well, I'd love to meet Charlie, And I kind of knew he didn't play anything exclusively. He played a mix of things. But I just thought it'd be cool. And at that point, I was sort of, it's hard to explain it, but, not indifferent, but I thought like, well, if I don't get to meet him, it's okay, but it'd be fun to meet him just because he was such a big hero of mine or something. And then it just didn't end up happening. The Stones were always in their own little sort of bubble, and you had to really be able to get at them. And I think Will said something like, they kind of do their own thing before. I said, it's okay, don't worry about it, maybe some other time. And then I think a few years later, when Lenny Kravitz was playing, Cindy Blackman again sort of said, like, if he comes out, I'll see if he can say hello, but don't worry about it, Cindy. Anyway, long story short, early 1997, they're recording at Ocean Way in LA, and Kenny Aronoff calls me one morning and said, oh man, I just recorded with the Stones last night. I played percussion. It was unbelievable. I had a great time. And Keltner, he was telling, and Kenny is so exuberant and excited and
jumping through the phone.
So and it was just really just a Kenny just calling just to say hi and just to share his excitement. And I've told this story, and I said I think he probably didn't go to bed because it was probably 6 o'clock in the morning on the West Coast, or 7 in the morning. He probably just got home, and so I called Ocean Way and asked for Chooch McGee, who I knew was Charlie's tech. And he wasn't there, but I left a message. And I said, I just want to leave a message. Could you ask him to call me? I work for Zildjian. They said, okay, we'll give him the message. Chooch, being Chooch, called me later that day. Hi, it's Chooch McGee. I said, Chooch, hey, he said, oh, hey, man, yeah, how you doing? I said, Chooch, we have these cymbals that we found a couple of years ago. They're A. Zildjian cymbals made in the 40s. Completely, new old stock, never played. We found them in a vault, basically. I gave Ringo a set in 1995, and before we lock these away, I'd love to gift a set to Charlie, if you could. And he said he would love that, but can you do me a favor? Can you just write all this in a letter and send it to me so I can just let Charlie read it? And so I wrote this letter, and I either faxed it or I FedExed it, I forget, but I sent it, and then the next day or the day after, I went on a clinic tour with Dennis Chambers for like 2 weeks. And in the course of that trip, I was checking my voicemail, and there was a message from Charlie Watts in my voicemail. He got my letter, and he would love to try the cymbals. And that was the surreal moment in my long-winded way. Yeah. That first message. And then a few months later, I met him for the first time. I was invited to see them in New Jersey. And I remember meeting him at the sound check, and Chooch said he wants to thank you for the cymbals, and if you'd like to come to the show. And they were playing in Boston a couple of days later, but I went to New Jersey, and I thought I'm going to just meet him, and that's going to be it.
Yeah.
And maybe I won't even. Maybe it'll get to the 11th hour, and it just won't happen, but that's okay. But I ended up meeting him. We chatted for a while, and then I saw him again later. And he said to me, you live in Boston, right? And I said, yes. And he said, are you coming to the Boston show? And I said, I'm actually coming to both shows. And he said, then I'll see you there. And I thought, okay, all right. So maybe I'm going to see him again, you know? And I said, Charlie, the night before your first show, and on Sunday night, there's a jazz drummer named Brian Blade playing at the Regatta Bar in Cambridge in Harvard Square.
What year was that?
It's 97. It's Joshua Redman Trio.
Okay, I saw, because I'm thinking I went and saw Brian Blade. It would have been like, it was probably 90, it was when he did the Fellowship, so it must have been after that.
A little after that, yeah. This is Josh's band with Christian McBride playing bass, and Brian. And I said, it's really great tenor player, you know, Joshua Redman and Brian, and he'd sort of heard of them, and he said, yeah, let me get back to you on that. So Chooch had my home number. He called me. It must have been like Saturday morning, because the show was a Sunday night. I remember this, and the show was sold out. Yeah. And Chooch said, Charlie and I would like to come if that's still possible. And I said, absolutely, I'll make it work. I called the manager of the club, and he said, I'll make it work.
No problem.
No problem. Yeah. So, and I said, can we avoid him coming in? He said, yeah, we'll figure it out. So I met them down at the front. We came in through some back way, had a table right in front of Brian, and I'm sitting there with Charlie and Chooch, and we're watching Brian. And I told Brian that Charlie was coming, and he was excited. And afterward, we went back to their little dressing room area and hung out for a while, and took some pictures, and it was great. And then the next night, I went to the show. He'd invited the band, Joshua Redman's band, to come to the show. So before the show, I'm chatting with Charlie, and he's like, that was really fantastic. He said, you know, I invited them to come, but they said they would, but they were just being polite. They don't want to come to this. And I said, no, I think they really want to come. Yeah. And then I got a call. I guess Brian had my cell phone number, but didn't have a phone, but Christian did. So Christian called me, and he said, we're out front, but we can't get in. So I went back with Chooch, who had his laminate, and we brought them back. And Charlie was elated. He was just so excited to see they actually came. He was like, really, I'm not making this up. It was, and that really began this friendship that, you know, he would say, I wasn't long after that, he said, if you come to London, call me, gave me his number and said, you know, if I'm in town, I'll, you know, have a coffee. And we did that several times. It was really great. There was another really surreal moment a couple of years before that when I mentioned Ringo, where I'd actually met Ringo before I met Charlie, and that was presenting these cymbals to him. I told Jeff Jonas, his tech, that I had these very special vintage A's from the 40s, and so we made a big presentation. Craigie Zildjian was there with me, and he could tell by looking at them. We took them out of the box, and he's like, wow. I mean, they're these beautiful vintage looking but brand new looking cymbals, and he put one on his finger, and he told Jeff, I want this on the kit tonight. And I went, oh boy, if you crack that, I don't know that I'll be able to send you a replacement, but I guess, gentle. Yeah, he played it for a few gigs, and then Jeff, I think, persuaded him to put it away. Yeah. But that was a surreal moment, because he was very fun and engaging, and we had a lot of laughs. And then years after that, I'd see him on tour, and sometimes he'd be able to have time to really sort of hang, and other times, more often than not, he had family there, and understandably, you know, be with family. But those because of who those two guys are in my life, you know, they were very special. And you know, I don't want to forget the late great Mitch Mitchell, who was a big influence. And when I got to know Mitch, and we became really fast friends. I mean,
is he originally from this area?
No,
somebody said
he's from London.
He is from London originally. Okay.
Yeah, he's a Brit. Was a Brit. Yeah, rest his soul. But no, I don't know that he ever lived here. He did live in Nashville for a little while, I think, and maybe even in Austin, but
never in this area.
But never in this
Somebody
area.
had said that years ago to me, that he was originally from this area, but he's probably Yeah, he was a huge influence too, because being 15 in high school being a jazz snob, you know, graduating from, I'm not going to play rock music because that's for the peasants, you know, I'm going to play sophisticated jazz. You know, doing 2 years of that and then like having bands wanting me to play. And I was like, I don't know, man, it's a rock thing. I'm a jazz guy. And then I went to the record store and was like, I'm going to buy some used records. And it was like greatest hits for Jimi Hendrix. Yeah. It was the one they were like dressed in cowboy outfits or something. I think that was the back cover. And I remember putting it on and I was like, this guy's a jazz drummer playing rock.
Oh, yeah.
Just from the fills. And then it was like, oh, okay, well, maybe I can do that because I'll put my jazz influence on these peasants in their high school rock band stuff. But that's when I ended up like switching, being like, man, music is music. And, you know, but when you're 15 and you think you know everything.
Elvin was a huge influence, and Tony Williams, you know, like just, you can hear it, like you say. As a young drummer, I didn't really understand it until I really listened to these other guys, and I went, okay, and Mitch, all those great rock drummers would always credit where they got it. They'd always say, you know, Terry Bozzio at every opportunity will say, I just stole from Tony Williams, or I got that from Tony Williams. And until you listen to Tony, you go, oh, okay.
I see.
And Vinny too. Vinny would always, you know, like Tony was the man, you know, and that's why it's important for young drummers to really listen to the guys that came before our heroes, because more often than not, you're hearing it from the source when you go to whoever influenced Vinny or Terry or Mitch. But the other funny thing is, when I was working for Simmons, I remember going to see the Monkees in 1986. It was their 20th anniversary. They had this big tour, very successful, sold-out concert tour. And it was a reunion of the three guys without Mike Nesmith. But as part of my job with Simmons, Mickey was playing out front a couple of Simmons pads. Yep. And I got a call from, I guess, his tech saying that a couple of the pads had gone down. They were playing out in Costa Mesa, which is out a couple of hours toward Orange County. Could I come to the show and bring some replacement stuff? So I go out there and I bring the stuff, and he said, do you want to meet Mickey? I said, I'd love to meet Mickey. So Mickey comes out, and he was so funny. I'm introduced to him, and he said, you know, all I'm doing is just playing these things, and they're breaking. And he said, he put his hand on my shoulder. He said, they sure don't make them like they used to. And it just stuck with me. You know, it's just a funny, you know, like little anecdote of like him going like, you know, they sure don't make them like they used to. Yeah. You know, I just pictured him like on that 20 years earlier on that show with some of the little goofy things they do. But that was a fun moment.
So talking about influences of things before, this is a good segue into your show, Live from My Drum Room. Because and we are going to put links up with the Venmo and everything.
Oh, thanks.
I don't know how often you restock. I know you said recently you got another run of stuff. Yeah. But I'll add all that stuff. We'll put the QR code if I can figure out how to do that. But I will definitely put the link to your show where they can get all that stuff.
Thank you.
So what I love about your show is seeing these drummers and not reading Modern Drummer anymore, learning from your people that you're doing, all the people you're interviewing, them talking about, I listened to this person growing up and that person. Like when you did Tim Alexander a couple weeks ago, talking about he went home every day and played the Elvis at Madison Square Garden. I'd never heard that album. And I put it on and I listened to it. I'm like, wow, that guy was amazing. Yeah. You know, like I had never heard of him before. Because was it DJ Fontana? Was that his original?
DJ was there early. Yep.
I just remember that name as Elvis's drummer.
Yeah.
But I love watching the show because you get these people that are on there talking about an album that they listened to.
Right.
Growing up, you know, what influenced you? I grew up listening to this album. And I'm like, oh, I've never heard that album. Let me go check that out. So how did you come up with? Did it start during COVID where it was like, we can't get together, so we can get together over the interwebs?
It started like in April of 2020, so it's hard to believe, almost 5 years now, and it was really, I just meant to be something to give me something to do, give my friends something to do, and I would joke with guys like Steve Gadd that, like, Steve, you've got nothing else going on, so you've got to do this with me. Like, don't tell me you're too busy because you're sitting there bored out of your out of your mind.
Little did you know he was writing a book.
Right, and that's when he told me that he was writing this book.
The Gadament's book.
Yeah, and in fact, I will just say he forgot this, but he remembers now that I said the name of the book should be Gadament's, and he's like, yeah, that's not bad. That's not bad. Anyway, but yeah, we Rick Marotta was probably the very first time I tried doing a stream. I'd never even attempted it before, and we tried a little experiment. And anyway, the idea sort of blossomed, and I started thinking about taking it more seriously, and people that I really would like to talk about and have on the show that probably were a little underexposed, for lack of a better word. You know, I've had plenty of people on that everybody knows who they are. But you know, drummers that are just I shouldn't say just because they're my friends, but they're friends that I grew up listening to, that influenced me, and then years later we worked together, and like a guy like Gary Malaber, Steve Miller's drummer, played on Van Morrison's Moondance. I mean, talk about, you know, a drummer that's prolific. And then, you know, naming guys like that huge respect in the industry, but probably not a lot of drummers might not know who Gary is, you know, or I just had Bill Gibson on not too long ago, who's a very dear friend, you know, Huey Lewis's drummer, and, you know, just a phenomenal compositional drummer, you know, comes up with great parts. You know, he's like the complete package of, like, you know, great time, great feel, great ideas, tons of chops. Yeah. So, but people might not think of Bill immediately when you think of like Vinnie Colaiuta or Dave Weckl. You might not, or Steve Gadd. You might not think of Bill, but you know.
But you know what? He can go to the movies when he wants, and he can go to the grocery store when he wants.
Yeah.
And he can go, I did all this stuff and saw all this stuff, and no one knows who I am. And this is, you know, that I always would joke, like, you know, people say, would you rather be, like, if you were famous, would you want to be that guy? And I remember saying, no, I want to be Charlie Watts. I want to just get my money, have fun, put, you know, take my shower, put my coat on, and go back
and go home,
and not have to worry about all the interviews and all the, you know, trying to be the publicist saying, you really need to go do this interview, and you need to go do this. But that's great that you're getting some of these drummers that, you know, aren't mainstream names, and putting them a little bit in the spotlight.
Exactly, and then, you know, trying to obviously get, you know, there are like well-known drummers that people want to know more about too, that I think it's important to try to maybe get them to talk about things they don't always talk about. And that's always been my angle, is to try to not ask the same questions that they've always been asked by everybody that's ever, like Steve Gadd, for example. He's always going to be asked about Asia, and did you really do it in one take? And you know, we did many clinic tours together over the years, and it would always be the first question from the audience. And he was such a sport about always answering the question with the same sort of enthusiasm and engagement as the first time he was asked it. So I have so much respect for that, and but trying to just dig a little deeper at times, you know. And I will say, Charlie, the year that Charlie passed away, 2021, I had spoke to him on his birthday, and I guess it was maybe even just a little before that, in a conversation, and I told him that I was doing this podcast, and I think I might have even mentioned it during, like even before that, during COVID, but I said, you know, I do these podcasts, and I have these drummers, and I mentioned drummers that I knew he knew, like Steve and Steve Smith, and I said, you know, it'd be great, maybe if you're on the road this year, we could do something. And he said, well, you know, John, I don't do those things. You know, I don't. And I went, well, I know. I said, and then he went, but maybe, you know, and I don't have a computer, but maybe, I don't know, maybe I could figure out a way to do it with, and he said the girls, and I think he either meant his granddaughter or his daughter. And I know his tech, Don McCauley, is a very good friend, and Don and I had this little idea that maybe on an off day, Don could go to his room with his, you know, he could make it happen easily. And
slide Charlie in front.
Yeah,
here you go.
And so I had this sort of pipe dream of, you know, really that would be the ultimate, would have been to have Charlie on there. But I know, because I all the times that we would hang out together, I'd try to slip in a little question about something, And I know it would always like jog his, he'd be like, oh, I don't remember. It's like, do you remember when you played that song? Did you play that part? He's like, I don't know. I have no idea.
In typical Charlie fashion.
Yeah. Were you using a Ludwig snare or a Gretsch snare on that? I don't remember, you know. So it's like, okay, I won't bother you anymore. But he, you know, I enjoy doing it because I feel like I'm documenting important people that you know, that people need to know about, and it seems to resonate with people. You know, the idea of somebody who's a friend of these guys having a more personal, intimate conversation. Yeah, and there's plenty of people out there that do it. I mean, look at Rick Beato. I mean, there are people that do an amazing job, and they don't have to know who the person is, and they do a great job. So it's not just that, but I feel like it's a little. When you know somebody, you can push some buttons that other people can't push, you know, and I can have some fun at times, and you know, I can call Rick Maraca Rick Maraca, you know. And
you guys had an episode, and I can't remember what it was. I think he was. Does he have a place on the Vineyard too?
Yes.
I think he was on the Vineyard, and you had there was 5 or 6 people in there, and I was at lunch, and my boss was like, "What are you laughing at in there?" He's just whatever jokes he was cracking. He was killing me. I was like, he is the best. He just kept like jumping in, and he would I can't remember what episode that was, but yeah, I was laughing like while I'm eating lunch, and my boss walked by, and he's like, "What are you laughing at?" And I go, "It's this drum thing. You wouldn't understand." So who have you not? I mean, clearly Charlie passing. Who on your show are you still trying to like get on? That it's just the stars are not lining up yet.
Okay.
Because I know you said today you're doing
Simon Kirk today,
and you said that's been a while trying to line that up to get it to.
Yeah, trying to, and we sort of finally landed on a date last week for this week, and then we had Simon had some things come up where we had to keep pushing things back, but we'll do it today, knock wood. Yeah. But I have Ainsley Dunbar, who I've had before, but next week we're going to do a more sort of deep dive into some tracks that he played on. I'm hopeful to get Russ Kunkel. Yeah. Russ, if you're watching this.
Probably not, but I hope so.
I hope to get Russ. I'd love to get Nigel Olson, who I've had spoken to somebody about the possibility. That seems to be some interest. Mick Fleetwood. These are, you know, big influential drummers to me, but I just think really important drummers that I'd like to really talk to. I'll just say this, I had a really fun, interesting call with Bobby Colombi last week. I got a hold of Bobby's email and number, and I emailed him, and he called me like immediately. And for his own reasons, and I fully respect it, he kind of declined. He just felt it wasn't really something that he felt he could really offer anything in the way of, and I tried to persuade him otherwise and tell him how important he is to drummers, but he feels that, and I don't think I'm betraying anything that he said, but he just felt like because he hasn't really been active for so long that he said, everything you want to know about me is in the documentary.
It's already out,
Yeah, and I said, well, Bobby, we could really dig deep. He said, I don't think so. But I'm not giving up on that. Yeah. And you know, people often say to me, "What about Ringo? What about Ringo?" And I think that's something that, you know, I would never even consider asking Greg Bissonette or anybody right in Ringo's circle to ask on my behalf, because that's a breach of what they've agreed not to do. Yeah. Everybody that's in Ringo's circle understands you don't come to him for a favor. Yeah. Ringo, can you loan me $50 to, you know, go out and have lunch today? And you just don't do that. So if Ringo organically heard about what I was doing, that would be great.
You should give Greg a call and say, listen, when you guys, you know, are in between, maybe you could be like, Ringo, check this out. Check out this podcast. Wouldn't it be cool if you were on this show?
I did when I saw Ringo a couple of months ago. I brought a shirt for him, but I don't know if he wore it or not. And I was hoping to see him that night. It was right at the last second that, and it turned out he got sick a few days later and canceled a bunch of the dates after that. So he's been very careful about not interacting with people, and I totally get it. He'll be 85 this year, so you know, a bad cold could really just mess them up. So I get that. But yeah, there are a few others that that probably if I think hard enough, they'll come to me. But those people that I mentioned, Russ Kunkel, we haven't been able to land on a date. We've kind of gone back and forth. And I'm going to have John Good, who I've, been trying to nail down for some time, who's, really the drum guy at DW Drums.
Yeah.
And that'll be a different kind of show to talk about just the history of DW and what John's done for that brand and the way he's, designing the drums and all that. But I think there's still a never-ending amount of drummers out there. I don't think I'm going to run out of drummers, to have on the show. The other person that's sort of in the offing right now is the great Billy Cobham. And that's going to be in conjunction with the new book that he has out with Hudson. And I've done that with a few of the guys that have, like Narada Michael Walden, Ilan Rubin, and Steve Smith, people that have put books out and then have a sort of podcast or the Jeff Beccaro book. Like just have the people involved to talk about the book. And So.
Now, what about Grand Theft Audio? Because my son, who's my production manager that you can't see, so the name of his band is GTA. And the first time I saw it, I'm like, GTA? So it's Grand Theft Audio, not Auto.
Right there.
There you go.
Oh, yeah, there it is. That's right. A friend of mine made that, brought it to a gig. So this is a band that I joined in 2014. And it's the quick, funny backstory is a couple of the guys in the band are friends from like my first band, going back 50 years now. And they needed somebody to fill in for a gig, and I had only just left my job at Zildjian about a year before that, had only just started really sort of trying to play again. I hadn't played for a long time. And can you fill in for us? And at first I'm like, I don't know. I'm not what you think I am. Like I'm not that I was any good then, but I'm not anywhere near as good as that now. And they're like, no, this is just, we're gonna play Beatles. They sent me a set list. It's like all these great songs, Beatles and Stones and Who, and I said, okay, yeah, I'll do it. So I had a few weeks to sort of brush up and play, and I did the gig, and it was great. I mean, I had a great time. They enjoyed it. They said, we have another gig in 2 weeks. Can you do that? Our regular drummer's sort of not really, and if you want to just be our drummer, and I'm like, yeah, okay, and so that was almost 11 years ago and over 10 years ago, and we're now a three-piece band. We're a trio, but it's fun. We're playing a couple 3 times a month. It's just fun cover classic rock stuff that we grew up listening to as kids. The only pressure I ever feel is like what drum set to play that week. And
I'm going to take a picture, folks, which he's put up on his podcast. There's about, I don't know how many, 12 to 15 sets of vintage Gretsch and other stuff. So I'll take some B-roll stuff. So that must be hard. I mean, do you flip a coin? Does the Craviato kit go out? Or
it's gone out a couple of times. Yeah. I don't know if it's going to go out anymore, though. I'm kind of afraid.
Yeah.
Just, But it should be played. So I have a gig next week. I may use it. They sound so great. So great. And it's nice to have them here when I come back from a gig and my drums are still in the bags.
Yeah, set up and ready to go.
These are ready to go.
Mic'd up,
But I've been using this Gretsch chrome over wood kit for the last few gigs too, which is 1970, 71. Sounds great. And I've got the Heyman kit out right now, which I know we can't see, but this will be in the backdrop for Simon Kirk, who was a big Heyman guy in the early 70s. But yeah, so Grand Theft Audio, I feel like, when it's the perfect situation for me when I left my job and retired from working at Zildjian, between having grandkids, playing in a rock band, and doing a podcast. It's busier than I ever want to be, and I wake up in the morning and, a busy day for me. And I'm not bragging, but it's like sometimes I'll wake up going, oh shoot, I've got a show today, and I've got to change the heads on my drums, or it's going to be a busy day for me.
And get to a soccer game.
A normal person could do all that in an hour, but for me, that's my whole day. Or deciding, what I'm going to do with my floor tom that day. Should I change the heads? I don't know.
Now you're singing with the band as well?
Yeah, all three of us. We all split the vocals equally. So on any given night, we'll each sing about a dozen songs. And we just this past week had a rehearsal and learned a couple more songs. And we it's kind of cool because we were playing a lot of leftover songs from when we were a 4-piece, and we sort of just divided up the vocals. The person that left the band, Neil, who's now in a band with his wife, was kind of our lead singer, and we all sang 3 or 4 songs each a night. So then we all, most of the songs were old songs that one of us took over vocals on, but now we're doing about 7 or 8 new songs with us, sharing the vocals, so it's fun. Yeah,
I just started singing recently, like right before COVID. My wife now was like, we're gonna do a duo, and it was COVID, and she's like, well, why don't you start playing guitar more? So I'm like, I don't know, if I can actually play guitar out and sing. So I did a couple, she would do 3 songs, I'd do 1. But now I'm a lot more comfortable singing because I used in the original band that I played in, the one that we did like the touring stuff, I would come up with demos and the guys would laugh because I'd put them on. It was me singing the demo. They're like, dude, that's the word. Like, thank God you're not like trying to be a singer. So I was always told, don't sing. But she was the one that was like, you can do this. It's an instrument. You have to think of it as an instrument and, practice it. And it's going to be bad and it's going to get better. But luckily, I don't sing that many songs when I'm playing drums, but I do the Levon anytime we do a band stuff.
Good for
so
you.
It's nice because when you watch the old Levon clips and he's like explaining how he sings, and it's actually easier because you leave the room in there. So it's always nice to meet another singing drummer.
Yeah. I've a couple other singing drummer friends, Stan Lynch and Simon Kirk. But Stan has commented on that. Stan used to do a lot of the high harmonies for Tom Petty. And I remember us talking about that, and he said he loved that because he said it really helped me keep my time together too. Yeah. Because if you're singing, right away if you're playing it too fast or too slow, and that is true. Because a couple of the songs that we do, I've just started too fast at times and gone, oh my God, what am I,
sorry,
what a mistake. Here I am now, I've got to sing this. And we just started this new song, probably before your time, John, but it's from Joe Jackson called Look Sharp. I don't know if you know that song. Yep. And I'm singing it. And my voice is probably the closest in terms of like the range for singing it. And I think I do an okay job, but there's a really crazy drum part in the middle of it. It's the hardest song for me to play and sing because so you sing the verse and it's just straight 8th notes, and then there's a part where it goes, tell me, I should know the words. Tell me if you think the world's a crazy place, but the beat goes like, tell me if the world. Anyway, it's
so trying to line your vocal up. Well,
yeah. I can do it when I'm sitting behind the kid. I just can't do it right now.
Well, what's funny is Sting said that he can't play his bass lines and not sing.
Yeah.
He said they're so together and integrated that. And it was like the thing that I think he did in Tuscany. And I think Christian McBride was asking him, well, what did you play on that bass line? And he's like, I have to sing it. I can't just play the bass line.
Yeah, I believe it. Yeah, I do. It's funny. I embraced the idea of singing a lot when we decided to go this way, but now some nights I really seriously I think I wish I could just play my drums for half the night and
not worry about it.
Yeah, not worry, because I'm still battling with silly things like the microphone placement, like.
There's never a perfect spot. Yeah, I've found so far. I can't find. I've tried goosenecks.
Yeah.
Like that. I've tried, and it always feels like I'm a little bit in the way.
Yep.
Although the easiest I found, which I looked like I was in sync, was I had a headset mic.
Yeah.
Which is okay.
It's okay.
But then I found that the one that I had to mute it, you had to press the button. So I would sometimes like burp or grunt or do something into the microphone, and the guys in the band are like, I'm like, oh, I forgot this is still on. So you can always try the headset mic if you can like get a mute pedal or something.
I did one. I used one a long time ago. It was one of the first Shure headset mics, and I just felt sonically it wasn't quite. I'm using the 58 I use here at home, but live I use this new. It's called Nexadyne. It's a brand new Shure mic that they had just come out with. And my friend Ryan Smith at Shure has been great in like lets me try stuff and gets me stuff at a deal, or even send me some things. But and this is a really spectacular vocal mic. To any vocalist that might see this, the Shure Nexodyne, and they've just come out with, just at the NAMM show, drum mics and other instrument mics. But and it's I can't blame anything on the mic, because that's perfect. It's just the way I can, once in a while I find that sweet spot, but other times I'm playing and I realize, oh no, if I just
come up a little too high,
I'm gonna hit it, and I've done it, and then I immediately, as soon as I know I'm not singing, I want to swing it out of the way as quick as I can, and just not have it there. But anyway.
Yep.
Yeah.
All right. Well, we are going to wrap this up because I know you have your podcast coming up at, I think you said 3 o'clock.
3 o'clock or something.
We're going to go get some pizza. We'll do some video there. We are going to, what's it called again?
Stoked. Here in Cohasset, Massachusetts. Just opened.
I'm excited.
Yeah, me too.
I looked online and the menu options look good.
It's good.
I'm sure it's going to be good.
We're going to like it.
So John, thank you very
John.
much.
My pleasure.
I've got a million more questions, so hopefully we can do a part 2.
I'd love to.
In a couple months or something.
Absolutely.
When you're not busy.
Love to.
So thanks for tuning in. I'm going to put John's links up in the description so you can check him out. I'm sure most of you that are actually watching this have already seen his podcast, and if you haven't, check it out.
Thank you. And I'll just say one last thing. As far as the shirts and the hoodies, 100% of the proceeds go toward a scholarship with Percussive Arts Society, PAS. So everything that comes in for hoodie and t-shirt sales goes toward that scholarship. So
that's awesome.
Yeah.
Great.
Thank you.
Thanks for tuning in, guys. We'll see you next episode.
All right.
Have a good day. Thanks for tuning in to episode 8 of Drummers Eating Pizza with John DeChristopher. Please like, share, subscribe. Check out John's links, especially for his t-shirt, sweatshirt. The QR code will be in his links. All the money goes to a scholarship for PAS, so all the proceeds go to that. Please check out his Live from My Drum Room podcast on YouTube. Like, share, and subscribe his stuff. I appreciate you guys tuning in, and I appreciate you, John, for taking the time to meet with myself, grab some pizza. We will see you next time. Thanks for tuning in. Have a great day.